A tarantula can park itself in one spot for 18 straight hours, barely moving. It might go a whole month without bothering to eat. Its heart beats maybe 30 times a minute. By any human measure, this is what death looks like, if death could hold a pose. Still, you looked at this fuzzy, slightly terrifying creature and thought, yeah, that's the pet for me. But what is a tarantula, really, and what's it actually like to own one? Is it as easy as feeding a cricket once a week? Are they as scary as they look? Is keeping a tarantula just a hobby or a disaster waiting to happen? People usually go down one of two paths when it comes to tarantulas. They're either convinced these spiders are deadly assassins, or they think they're basically hairy paperweights. Low maintenance, no danger, no big deal. Honestly, both ideas miss the mark. The real story behind tarantulas is a lot more specific and a lot cooler. Let's actually dig into what makes up a tarantula. It's not an insect, it's an arachnid. And in the animal kingdom, that's a whole different setup. Tarantulas breathe with book lungs. Imagine stacks of tiny, folded sheets inside them, pulling in the air straight from outside. No bones either. Their skeleton sits on the outside like a tough suit of armor, so when they outgrow it, they have to crawl out and shed the whole thing. That's called molting, and it's a huge deal. The tarantula is soft and totally helpless during this long, nerve-wracking process. If something messes with it, it can die. Here's what you need to know. Tarantulas aren't just low-effort pets you set on a shelf and forget about. They're slow, deliberate creatures, almost like they're on a different timeline compared to mammals. Let's talk about why having a tarantula actually makes sense. First, these spiders hardly eat, sometimes just once every couple of weeks if they're adults. No mess, no weird smells, no annoying sounds, and you don't have to worry about dander triggering allergies. Most species just hang out quietly in a little box, barely moving unless they have to, and it's oddly relaxing to watch them. Their movements have this slow, almost graceful precision, kind of like you're watching a tiny architect at work. Now here's the twist, their lifespan. For a lot of species, especially females, you're not just signing up for a couple years. You're looking at 20 or even 30. That's not a pet until the next one. That's a creature you actually grow old with. You plan life around it. But here's what the unboxing videos won't tell you. A lot of tarantulas from the Americas have a neat party trick. When they feel threatened, they kick clouds of tiny barbed hairs off their own backs. Those things get everywhere, in your skin, in your eyes, and trust me, they're not just annoying. They can leave you uncomfortable for days, sometimes longer. For these spiders, tossing hairs works better than a bite. So when everyone says they're docile, that doesn't mean you can cozy up next to them without consequences. Sure, their bites usually aren't a big deal, just about as bad as a wasp sting for most kinds. But don't get cocky. Some old world tarantulas pack venom that really hurts. We're talking big pain, muscle cramps, even feeling sick. And just to spice it up, the old world guys are faster and a whole lot jumpier. But here's what stings a little deeper. Tarantulas don't do bonding. You're not getting the warm fuzzies. They won't notice you, they won't come running, and honestly, they don't care if you dote on them. If you're looking for a pet that actually connects with you, a tarantula is just not going to play that game. So let's say you've made your choice and brought one home. What's it actually like day by day? Less work than you might expect, if you nail the setup. There's not much wiggle room for mistakes though. If you've got a ground dweller, they need a wide, shallow space. Doesn't matter how tall the enclosure is. What matters is that a short fall can split them open. That's game over. Tree dwelling types want the opposite. A tall enclosure with bark or cork to climb. They hardly ever touch the ground in the wild, so you need to give them vertical territory. Then there's the endless battle between humidity and ventilation. Let it get too dry and your tarantula could get stuck during a molt. That's a death sentence unless you catch it in time. But turn it into a swamp and you'll be dealing with mold, trouble for book lungs, and overall health. You have to run a tightly balanced microclimate, matched to wherever your spider comes from, and you have to keep an eye on things before small problems snowball. Once you dial everything in, daily care is pretty chill. Top off the water, check the substrate, toss in food once every week or two. Most of the work goes in up front, get the setup right, and the rest is pretty much autopilot. When keepers say a species is calm, It's easy to get confused about what that actually means. Docile doesn't mean a spider wants to be your pal, and it definitely doesn't mean you can handle it without thinking. A tarantula isn't going to recognize you or bond with you or learn your habits. What keepers are really talking about is how the spider tends to react to surprises. Does it run, freeze, or stand its ground? A calm tarantula usually scurries off to hide if something spooks it. More defensive species, on the other hand, go for the classic threat pose. They rear up, show their fangs, and basically say back off, long before they ever think about biting. Biting is their absolute last resort. That whole threat display, it's important. People often confuse it with aggression, but honestly, it's more like a blaring smoke alarm than a fight. The tarantula is trying to make things stop before they get ugly. Still, most experienced keepers who get bitten aren't attacked out of nowhere. They ignore those warnings and stick a hand in anyway. This is where most of the real risk in keeping tarantulas lies. It's not really about their venom, it's about how we handle them. Most of the time, if anyone gets harmed, it's the spider. Tarantulas are surprisingly fragile. Their exoskeleton doesn't have much give, and their bellies are soft. Drop one, even just a little ways, and you can kill it. Ironically, a fall is usually deadlier to the tarantula than any bite would ever be to you. Here's the thing almost no one thinks about: the math behind the commitment. Sure, the upfront costs are basically nothing. You grab an enclosure, some substrate, a hide, the tarantula itself, all cheaper than a single vet bill for a cat or dog. Feeding? Crickets, roaches, mealworms, those are practically free, and since you're only tossing them in every week or two, you barely notice it on your budget. But stretch that bargain price over the years, and suddenly everything looks a little different. A female tarantula from a long-lived species can outlive your car, your job, maybe even your next relationship, a full decade or two of your life. It's not about affording one spider. It's about being the type of person who wants a quiet, 2-decade-long commitment just hanging out in the corner, staying exactly the same while your whole life flips upside down. That's what you don't see on the price tag. It's one of the cheapest pets you'll ever have year to year, and one of the most serious ones you'll ever take on. There's something that often gets left out of all those care guides. How did that animal actually end up in your enclosure? Some species you see in the hobby now are almost always captive bred. They've been raised by people for generations, their ancestors long gone from the wild. But things are different with tarantulas. Breeding them takes patience and a bit of luck, and some species just won't reliably breed in captivity, so if you find them for sale, odds are they've been pulled straight from their native home. That's a big deal for a couple of reasons. First, wild-caught animals usually arrive stressed and tougher to care for. They get sick more easily, and they don't settle in the way you'd hope. It's the opposite of that just set it up and watch ease that lures people in. Second, and this is even bigger, wild tarantula populations actually feel the pressure. Between habitat disappearing and people collecting them for pets, some species have become rare enough to need international protection. I'm not saying keeping tarantulas is wrong. The hobby exists because some keepers want to enjoy these creatures without harming wild populations. Captive breeding is supposed to make that possible. But really, being a responsible keeper starts long before you pick out the tank or order supplies. It starts with the one question most people skip. Was this animal bred in captivity or taken from the wild? You might have a calm spider that sticks to the ground, or a speedy, jumpy one up in the trees. Those two can feel like completely different animals, even though both get called tarantulas at the pet shop. When people argue about whether they're good pets or a bad idea, they're usually talking about totally separate creatures that just share a name. And here's the thing, a tarantula isn't a pet like a dog or a cat. It works on a different level. You don't build a relationship through cuddles or tricks. It's about watching and making sure its needs are met, not hoping for affection or feedback. Judging a tarantula like you would a puppy kind of misses the whole point. If we're being honest, keeping a tarantula isn't about taming some wild thing. It's about looking after a creature that doesn't need or notice you, but still finding value in that. The good and the bad aren't even opposites here. They're really just two sides of the same idea. This animal barely asks anything from you, and in return, it barely gives anything back, except maybe the quiet reward of seeing it just live its life. And the real cost? Not much money, hardly any time. What you do need is the willingness to care for something that won't ever care about you. Low effort on the day-to-day, high on patience. That's the deal. Want more stuff like this? Stick around. There's a lot to find in the tiny lives right next to you.